Everyone. I'm Rebecca Colwell.
No, you're good.
Okay. I am the program manager for resource stewardship and science here at Acadia National Park. So welcome, everyone. I'm very glad you could join this webinar. I wanted to introduce Hannah and then talk a little bit in terms of the work she's been doing. This is really important work that Hannah has engaged in with us. I drove by this morning on my way here from Trenton, across the Trenton Bridge at Thompson Island, and I counted 12 vehicles parked along the side of the road there. It's that time of year. The worms are rising. The price of bloodworms is 80 cents a piece almost, and so that some of the folks who are important stakeholders in this work are out there working, and you know that is a part of what we're trying to understand around managing the intertidal zone at Acadia, or not managing, or co-managing with others who have other stakeholders who have a lot of interest in this work as well. So we've been talking about doing this engagement since about 2016 around understanding what is the intertidal zone at Acadia. It is a multi-jurisdictional area. It has lots of interest amongst others. It's an ecosystem that we have do a lot of research around, but on the same time, we don't know as much about as we do some of our terrestrial systems. So this ongoing work, planning, bringing folks together is kind of not culminated, but one of the big pieces of it is the work that Hannah Mittelstaedt has been doing as a postdoc at the Schoodic Institute. Hannah received her PhD last year from the University of Maine in, tell me again, Hannah.
Ecology and environmental sciences. EES, probably.
EES program, thank you. And looking at invertebrates within the, in the lower intertidal zone. So she's been working for over almost 6 months, pulling together, thinking about how do you measure, what is a healthy intertidal and how do you measure that? And then brought together a workshop and a planning team. And today she's going to give us a briefing about that project and where we are in the work that she's done. And so take it away, Hannah.
Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, well, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to share the work that I've been doing and what we were able to accomplish at the recent workshop. Oh, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll just jump into my presentation. Ooh. All right, can you all see my slides okay? I'll take that as yes. Sorry, let me just adjust so I can see my notes and everything. All right. Yeah, so like Rebecca said, since this summer, I've been designing a framework for assessing the health of the rocky intertidal and mud flats in Acadia. So as you're all familiar with, the intertidal is a really dynamic ecosystem in Acadia. It's a coastal park. So these dynamic ecosystems are, really valuable and important. And, we can poke around at them at low tide and then it's covered up by the sea at high tide. And these ecosystems face just a myriad of stressors and pressures, from sea level rise and changing environmental conditions due to climate change to negative effects of invasive species. So this is an ongoing effort to understand the health of the intertidal and has been focused on two types of intertidal ecosystems in Acadia, so mudflats and rocky intertidal. Both have a lot of cultural and ecological value. And, we have these squishy mud flats where worms and clams can be harvested, and then the hard, rocky intertidal that's covered in algae and sessile invertebrates like particles. So for years now, there's been this concerted effort to understand, are the rocky intertidal and mudflats in Acadia healthy? But in order to answer that question, you have to decide what makes the intertidal healthy or unhealthy. So what does health even mean in this really variable ecosystem? And you can imagine that the answer to that question might vary depending on who you are and what your values and experiences are. So if you're a park visitor, a worm harvester, or a scientist, and also just like with humans, there are a lot of factors that influence ecosystem health and condition. So in order to answer the question, we also have to decide not only what factors to consider, but also how to take a lot of different elements and synthesize that into an overall health assessment framework, an overall health summary. So this requires incorporating multiple forms of knowledge, considering multiple perspectives on health. And for the past, I don't know, how many months have I been here? I've been designing a framework for assessing the health of the rocky intertidal and mudflats in Acadia. So my intent is that by designing this framework for assessing the health of Acadia's intertidal, I can kind of bridge that gap between the first and second question, allowing us to answer the third. So today I'll be sharing my process and progress on building a health assessment framework and some of the outcomes that we found. So like I said, this is part of a larger ongoing process to better understand what health means for the rocky intertidal and mudflats. In 2016, how come my slide? Yeah, so in 2016, Acadia and Schoodic began an effort to understand and assess the intertidal ecosystem conditions in Acadia, especially in light of legislation that affirmed the rights to traditional harvesting of worms and clams in the intertidal zone in the park. So over a series of 5 workshops from 2016 to 2019, some of which you may have attended, members of the harvest, research, conservation, and management communities came together to share their perspectives on just what a healthy, resilient intertidal ecosystem looks like. So this work was continued through several projects, a research symposium, and continued stakeholder engagement. Notably, Ellie Oldak, who gave a Lunch and Learn last year, her work evaluating these workshops was really informative. So this is where my work picks up, using our understanding of what intertidal health means from multiple perspectives. I've been developing this tool for measuring overall intertidal health. So starting last summer, I began collating information and insights gained through these workshops into a framework that can be used to track and communicate intertidal health through time. So fortunately, there are a lot of programs and methods for assessing multiple aspects of ecosystem health all over the nation and globally. So I looked into other health assessment frameworks for ideas on structure, as well as how to monitor and disseminate information on ecosystem health. So from our previous work and participant input, 3 goals for healthy rocky intertidal and mudflats emerged based on the different ways that people value these ecosystems. So namely, these are healthy communities, healthy harvest, and healthy habitats. So the healthy communities goal concerns cultural and personal connections to the intertidal, including how the intertidal contributes to the park experience and sense of place of both visitors and local community members. Healthy harvest covers the productive and sustainable harvest of clams and worms in mudflats, as well as environmental factors affecting harvest and the communities of harvesters themselves. And the healthy habitats goal is about aspects of the rocky intertidal and mudflats that contribute to functioning diverse ecosystems, such as abundance of certain species, as well as environmental conditions. So I'll just give you an overview of what this framework structure is and then dig into more of the details of how, of what exactly this looks like and how we got here. So the proposed framework structure has several components. So within each goal, there are nested vital signs, which are key elements essential to successfully meeting each goal. And then vital signs are represented by one or more indicators, which are things we can actually measure and monitor over time. And then each indicator is measured by an appropriate assessment tool. So just as an example, and if you've seen any of my other presentations, this will be very familiar. So let's say for the healthy habitats goal, one vital sign might be the presence of key species. And an indicator of this in the rocky intertidal could potentially be the abundance of Jonah crabs, which could be surveyed at regular intervals. Okay, so for each goal, I drew upon previous work and other frameworks to research, previous frameworks and research to identify potential vital signs, indicators, and assessment tools. Some of these indicators are already assessed on a regular basis. Others are not currently measured within the park. And ultimately, we can use this structure to gather information to identify which vital signs of intertidal health are improving or getting worse in a digestible and easy to disseminate way that represents these diverse perspectives on intertidal health. So this is an example from Puget Sound Partners Vital Signs Report and their for their healthy water quality goal. So one thing to note is that with this format, you receive all this information in this portfolio of vital signs and indicators, but you can still look at it through your own lens. So you can imagine that some folks would be more interested in the freshwater quality vital signs, while others would want to pay more attention to the marine vital signs and indicators. So this type of assessment and reporting can be repeated to track intertidal health over time. So for example, the State of the Bay report has been tracking the health of Chesapeake Bay for several years, making it very clear what's getting better and getting worse. So these types of frameworks could guide on-the-ground work to understand the health of Acadia's intertidal zone. And just one thing to note, like a lot of these examples are for like much larger, more populated geographic areas. So, but there are like really helpful elements that I was able to scale down, or in some cases like scale up so that they fit Acadia. Okay, so once you like have this framework established, you can report out the relevant aspects of the indicators. So Puget Sound Partners, they assess the status or current conditions of indicators. And for certain indicators, they set goals and say whether these indicators are above or below them. And then for some indicators, we might not be able to work towards a desired outcome because it's either not something that we can feasibly manage for, or there might not be a clear, like, healthy target. And then you can also track indicator progress or change over time. So whether indicators are getting better or worse or not changing at all. This also allows, so this type of structure also allows room for insufficient data or no data if an assessment tool hasn't been developed yet. And so similarly, the state of the estuary for the San Francisco Bay and Delta looks at the status and trends of indicators. And similar to the situation, they're working with two different ecosystems. So some indicators are assessed for both the San Francisco Bay and Delta, while others apply to only one or the other. And their reporting really clearly illustrates what is good, or what indicators are good, fair, or poor in condition, and how that's varied over time. So these reporting structures are also similar to the National Park Service nature condition assessment for the parks. So just in terms of condition and trends in condition, and then they also assess how confident you are in that assessment. Okay, but before we can report the condition and trends of indicators, we have to decide what indicators to measure and report on. But if we think about all the possible components of healthy mudflats and rocky intertidal ecosystems in Acadia, we can't possibly measure all of them. So this is a conceptual diagram that you definitely don't need to read all of. Some of you might already be familiar with it. It's from an open standards for conservation planning process that was part of a 2016 workshop. So it just illustrates like a multitude of stressors and pressures on the intertidal and which components of intertidal ecosystem services influence like the well-being of the Acadia community. So a large portion of my work has involved identifying which potential indicators to prioritize, the data availability for indicators, and the feasibility of continuing or starting to monitor them. Okay, so to identify the most essential vital signs and indicators, we hosted a workshop a few weeks ago. I think I already know that we have some folks that were at the workshop in attendance here, so thanks for coming to both. And so we had several goals for the workshop. Our first goal was to solicit feedback from experts, partners, collaborators, and community members on this draft healthy intertidal framework. We also wanted to, we wanted to find out if, what we're including is what they or previous workshop attendees said to include when thinking about intertidal health. So our next goal was to exchange or to identify areas to refine within this framework. And then we also wanted to exchange scientific observation, local or harvest-based information to strengthen this knowledge base and improve data exchange. And then finally, we want to continue to build relationships with and between different interest groups to manage this whole cultural and natural intertidal ecosystem and really keep this community that was developed through the earlier workshops going. So we had 31 participants at the workshop, representing 20 organizations. This was a hybrid meeting, which was really fortunate. And so we broke the day up, so before the workshop even started, we had folks evaluate vital signs with a pre-workshop survey. And then we broke the day up into evaluating indicator priority and then identifying assessment tools, potential partners, and data sources, both in different breakout groups. So just to dive into that a bit more. So from our list of vital signs, we selected a subset to bring to the workshop. So when deciding which vital signs made the cut, we took several factors into consideration. So we considered how well the survey responses that we got represented the different viewpoints and experiences of folks we invited to the in the larger intertidal community. And then we also took questions and comments and clarifying suggestions into consideration. And then we were looking at how these priorities ranked within their goals. And so the idea was really to take this suite of vital signs, identify which ones were the most important, so that because we only had a day with all of our workshop attendees, so that they could focus on these highest priority vital signs. And so then at the actual workshop, we worked at the indicator level for the first half. So kind of throughout too. So we focused on the indicators of those highly prioritized vital signs. And then in breakout groups, we asked participants to rank the relevance and importance of indicators and how well they supported our vital signs and health goals. And then they identified potential partners and stakeholders working in the realm of each indicator. So then midway through the day, we used this feedback to narrow down our field of indicators for the afternoon session to get even more detailed feedback on now these high priority indicators. So we asked participants to work in breakout groups to identify existing or potential health assessment tools. And then we asked them to identify how often they thought these indicators should be assessed, how feasible assessing them would be. So how time intensive or expensive these assessment tools are or would be, and then what these indicators would look like in healthy and unhealthy conditions. So trying to just get a sense of people's knowledge and perceptions of what that would look like. So what did we find? So at a very mechanical level, we were able to use participant feedback to refine our prioritization of vital signs and their indicators, and identify how to improve our indicators or their descriptions that we already had. And we also had a lot of brain power to identify how indicators are already assessed within the park in Maine or elsewhere, or generate creative ideas on how these could be assessed. So yeah, it was just really valuable to have so many people who are working in the space in one room, sharing their knowledge of the intertidal and the larger intertidal community landscape in Maine. But this workshop also allowed us to continue to work with and strengthen ties within the intertidal community. So in terms of areas of improvement that were identified, we heard from participants that parts of the day felt really rushed. Admittedly, we were trying to pack a lot in to a less than 8-hour workshop. So folks said that they would have liked more time to really sit with and evaluate the indicators. And we also could continue to make sure that we have a better representation of interest holders in the intertidal to make sure that we have more voices in the room, because we do have participation kind of skewed towards researchers and managers in this context. But overall, participants reported that this was a really positive experience. We especially heard good things about the interdisciplinary aspects of the day and hearing about each other's experiences and knowledge in the intertidal. So I just really enjoyed getting to eavesdrop on everyone's awesome conversations. Okay, so since the workshop, I've been feeding what we learned back into the framework to design and evaluate what we know about indicators and identify knowledge gaps. So I'm basing this off of how workshop participants prioritized vital signs and indicators and how these ranked in previous workshops and other work too. So I've also been considering the data availability for each indicator. So this includes both the monitoring status of potential assessment tools, so whether it's currently or has been monitored in Acadia, and whether this is like a really established, like well-funded project, or something that was maybe a one-off project or like lost funding at some point. And this also includes like how accessible or relevant data is. So is it something that can easily just be summarized, or does it require a bit more of like working with the data generators or the folks who generated the data and a bit more digging? So these criteria exist along a spectrum and can be used to identify research or knowledge gaps. But we can also consider like the feasibility of continuing or starting to assess an indicator. So if we think about, these 4 quadrants, we have, really high priority indicators that have a lot of data already available to them. So these would be things that are already kind of continually monitored in the park or that we know a lot about. And then within these high priority indicators, there are things that, don't have as much data available for them. So it's helpful to know like how feasible bringing the indicators that are in this quadrant over to this quadrant. You can see my mouse, right? Like that. Okay, great. So this is really helpful for identifying which data gaps can be easily filled or might require a bigger lift. So sort of identifying that like low-hanging fruit that a potential partner could pick up and share their findings, or what I've been calling like the higher hanging fruit that would be, maybe really important to monitor, but requires just, a lot more. It's just a more complex project or something. Okay, so from all of this, some very high priority indicators sifted to the top. So I'll just sort of like go through an overview of these. We can definitely come back to them if anyone has any like specific questions. I'm also writing up a report, so there's going to be like a lot more detail on all of the indicators and this whole process too. So this is really just meant to be kind of like an overview of what we found to be like these really high priority indicators of health. So I'll share these along with their estimated data availability and feasibility, which I've loosely categorized as low, medium, and high estimated data availability and feasibility. So within the healthy communities goal, the indicators for the vital signs of visitor experience and Wabanaki cultural site integrity. So that's, assessing visitor appreciation and connection, and then the status of middens, along the super title. were ranked as highly important. And then within the Healthy Harvest goal, so some of the indicators just to highlight were, assessing like the sustenance access or access for Wabanaki harvesters. That's obviously like a larger like policy and like state issue, but some of yes, it's one of the indicators that's kind of more oriented towards like social science or a policy review. And there's also these more biophysical monitoring oriented indicators like looking at bivalve abundance and their population and age structure, as well as worm population and age structure, and different effects of pollution. Yeah. And then in terms of habitat, we saw that biodiversity and these indicators of connectivity to other ecosystems sort of sifted to the top, as well as the abundance and distribution of invasive species. So within like the habitats goal, there's definitely room to kind of hone in on exactly which invasive species, and then also, key species are the most important to monitor within that. And then this is also an area where we see different potential assessment tools for the rocky intertidal and mud flats. So for example, for the biodiversity indicator, we can use the ongoing NETN long-term monitoring for that, but there isn't necessarily a way to continually measure that in mud flats. So where you see the darker blue circles, those are kind of the things that we could either easily feed into the framework or might not require as heavy of a lift to assess. Acting on or managing that would obviously require a different amount of effort. And then where you see those lighter color circles, that's where, these were identified as important indicators, but would, require more legwork to assess. So just briefly, I'll show the kind of the next tier, these high priority indicators, and really like it was hard to delineate between these very high and high priority indicators. So these are definitely ones that are, right in the top of the recommended indicator priorities. And there's definitely overlap within the vital signs too. So I'll just like leave that for a sec to glance over. And again, we can definitely return to this. And in terms of some like general recommendations for each kind of category of indicators based on their priority, data availability, and feasibility, these high priority, high data availability indicators, these can we potentially have enough data to, if it's appropriate to identify thresholds of like healthy or unhealthy, we can do that. Or we have data on we have enough data to identify their condition and trends, so we can just feed that into this framework. And then, we would also want to keep supporting these monitoring programs. And then so for these high priority but low data availability indicators, we could encourage the development of these assessment tools by either the park or partners, like those identified earlier in this process. So this is definitely not, I'm not proposing this as like all on the park's shoulders. Like there are a lot of partners who would be able to, help deliver data on these. And then sorry, just going back really quick. And then we would also want to, within that, prioritize these more highly feasible indicators and assessment tools, those ones that are kind of the more high-hanging fruit. And then just going to this lower right quadrant with these kind of medium or lower priority indicators, but that already have high data availability. So these would be things that maybe didn't, sift out to the top in terms of the like workshop participants like priorities, but there's something that there's already data on or is already monitored on a regular basis. Like these shouldn't be ignored. Like these should definitely be incorporated into the framework, but especially as they might become more important later on. And then just to kind of look at some potential next steps, like I said, we can fill this framework in with the status or condition and trends for indicators with enough available data and start to fill in and flesh out this report card on intertidal health. And then we can address knowledge gaps, but potentially by encouraging outside partnerships and collaborations. And then with this comprehensive health summary, we can communicate overall intertidal health outcomes and easily identify and share, what's doing comparatively well and not so well. And, we can do that looking at factors that are, really different like that, you can be looking at, what are some biophysical factors that are doing well, as well as, like some more social factors. And then in terms of how we could apply this framework, it helps to identify conservation priorities, inform management practices, and some indicators. And it's important to remember that like some of these indicators are valuable just to track, but there might not really be any way to directly control them. So something like water temperature is something that you would want to monitor over time, but there's not really going to be a way to change that. And then this can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of management or conservation responses. So ideally, this would be a iterative process that can be adjusted and refined over time as conservation priorities shift, as the landscape within the intertidal community shifts, and as new stressors arise in the intertidal too. So with that, I just want to say thank you for everyone for listening and taking all of this into consideration, and for folks who participated in the workshops or met with me and gave me really amazing insights into all of this. And then also thanks to Rebecca and Abe for their guidance, and to Hannah Weber for her guidance and support through all of this too. So I'm happy to answer any questions, go back to any slides. Yes, I have my contact info up there too if you want to reach out for any suggestions or things that or any further conversation.
Thank you, Hannah. I can't see if there are questions out there in the chat, but maybe Shannon, you can. Or anyone here has a question or comment or?
Here, I'll ask the question. Hey Hannah, this is Kate. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm curious when you're starting to look at like actual, I guess you call them indicators that you measure, if you're gonna assess like the uncertainty around those metrics, or uncertainty or like precision, whatever, some measure of like power to detect differences.
I think so I guess the one part of this is that a lot of this, I'm saying like that we can do this, but my postdoc is wrapping up, so these are good things to think about for future folks working on this. So definitely in terms of the uncertainty around the condition or trends of a indicator, I think that's something that is consider that is kind of established in the way that the parks think about this. So in the existing like national park kind of like symbology for the sort of stuff, there is this confidence and assessment option, and that's something that I think you know, this could bring to this larger effort to use these sorts of frameworks, because it's not something that is kind of explicitly outlined in a lot of these the other like frameworks that I've looked at, although those also probably have different like target audiences as well too. So
Hannah, one of the things I heard at one of your earlier presentations was that you were thinking about how climate change is going to affect like your definition of healthy between now and 10 years from now. So like,
Mhm.
how will we use the indicators to like, how is this built to evolve as the ecosystem continues to evolve?
yeah, great question. Yeah, so I think it's definitely something, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword with the intent for this to be an evolving process. You also don't want to fall victim to shifting baselines. One thing that I've noticed that other frameworks do is that when they're, you know, setting their thresholds for, you know, what is healthy or unhealthy or sort of like in between, or any like management targets, like they are really explicit in establishing like what their baseline is, and then what, if it's like a target, what the date for that would be. So kind of like keeping um you know, these explicit like date ranges or you know, starting points in mind, I think is really helpful for that. And yeah, I mean, one thing that we've talked about a lot with this is yeah, how do you account for um these really big overall shifts, or how like resilient the ecosystem is overall. So I don't necessarily have like a direct answer besides that. I think that that comes in as you're, yeah, delineating the thresholds and goals for the indicators themselves.
All right, and we have a question from online. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask it of Hannah.
Oh, can't. Sorry, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hannah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for putting together this talk. My question relates to the table you had presented where we were sort of looking at priority levels and like feasibility and data access. And I think they were ranked, you know, low, medium, and high. And it seems like a lot of them just fall out of being high or low. And I'm wondering if you just have any thoughts on, you know, sort of the existence of that dichotomy and how we can move forward in a framework where you do have to make hard decisions about what to prioritize. Just sort of what advice you would give on overcoming that polarization.
Yeah, that's a really good question and a really good point. And yeah, definitely as I was putting together that slide, that really like jumped out at me, just, oh, this is, I'm not putting as many of these medium circles in here. Yeah, so I think, so something with the, I can just jump to that slide too. Actually, let me go to a different version of it that has a little bit more notes for me. Weird. Okay, anyways, I don't, oh, this is not, these are not the slides I wanted them to be. Wait, yes, it is. Sorry. Yeah, so a couple of things with that. So both of these rankings of data availability and feasibility are kind of based on multiple variables. So there's sort of like rankings within these rankings that might help sort of suss out which of these the kind of indicators on the lower side of this dichotomy might be more feasible or have more data available. So with data availability, I'm looking at you know, the monitoring status and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on this and I've been thinking about it so much lately. Yeah, so like what yeah, so basically with both of these, it might be something where I might just need to fine tune kind of what these delineations are based off of the factors that are going into them. And they are they are a representation of a lot more detail. So one of the things that I'm doing in my report is really like writing out like why each of these indicators falls into these categories too. So yeah, and I think part of it is that there is sort of this like natural dichotomy too of things that are already being assessed in the park or could really easily be expanded from other places in Maine into the park, and uh, other assessments that are just really like money and time and manpower intensive too. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah, those are my thoughts. I think that's a really good point.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for the response.
There is another question from online in the chat, and Chris is asking, if you were a manager and had the money for a summer student, what would you have them do to move this forward? Are there a couple of indicators that you would have them work on first?
Yeah, so I think yes, oh man, so many thoughts. Yeah, so just going back to my kind of quadrat slide. So I think it depends on with that, like what you would want your student to be doing. So I think probably, yeah, the thing that's the kind of like most easily accomplished is, putting is like, taking one or more indicators and that we have a good data set for, and trying to suss out a way to say, what is healthy, what isn't healthy, which is a really complicated question. And, there are a lot of ways you can go about that, by either, looking at other research, or anything with like tipping points, and, or soliciting expert opinion, or, other ways of, asking like the broader community what that indicator would look like if it was healthy or unhealthy, or in healthy or unhealthy conditions. Um, and this like this effort, is doing some of that, but there are just like I but the priority has been to identify kind of like the state of all of the indicators. I wish I had the time like during this project to really dive into to some of these more detailed questions with each of them. Yeah, so I think that would be one recommendation, is to pick the indicators that are probably like the most ripe for feeding into the framework, um and yeah, just identifying those trends, and like Kate said, like looking at how um reliable that is. Um and yeah, and then I think looking at these really high priority indicators that aren't currently assessed, I there's that's a whole other question of how much it takes to be monitoring that over a long time period, but that doesn't mean that you can't like start. And there could be, I think that there's a lot of room for a student to do a pilot study, get some information about like how often you would have to. I'm thinking very much in terms of like a biophysical monitoring protocol. Yeah, like what to figure out like what that assessment would actually look like, or what you could adapt from another place or ecosystem.
Are you offering, Chris?
No, Rebecca, I'll just say that, Hannah, I was actually trying not to be abstract. I was actually saying like name them. Like, you know, yeah, there's characteristics, but and no, Rebecca, I'm not offering, but we know that they exist. But like, yeah, like if there were 2 or 3 things that like are fruit that you think you have, like, can you like go to that list of priorities and like name a couple?
Yeah, well, I guess
Start
like
with?
if I were to name a couple, it'd be all of these. So I guess my question back to you is like do you see do you see something on this list that like you would recommend to a student to pick up? Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
That's just cheating. You can't like pass it right back to me. I don't know. What do we think?
So like for example, like let me just think of one that so like bird use, that's one that a uh UMaine student for her like honors undergrad thesis like developed this protocol, and it like, looked like there was some intent for that to become a long-term assessment, but I haven't necessarily but I don't know like what the state of that is, so like there um that would be like one place that if you had, depending on like your students' interest, that would be like, I don't know, good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think the visitor experience one's interesting because we think it's feasible. So I think piloting a visitor like census to just try and see how the hell it works would work. I actually like the bird one because it's one that I think that there's a lot of people out there in the world that would be happy to do. And then I'm thinking about like with harvest, like what's the most obvious one with harvest? You know, Hannah certainly is doing a lot with worms these days. There's probably a little more bivalve out there just because of what local town committees are doing, maybe. And so I would be like trying to talk with DMR about that, maybe as another alternative. Yeah, those would be a couple I would think about.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and like that I mean, that's exactly what I'm hoping that this like where this is at right now can be useful for, is for, you know, kind of offering like a buffet of topics that have been identified as being important to the park and folks in the intertidal community, and then for people to, you know, be able to use that priority identification to leverage, you know, finding their own funding, or just deciding on like which directions to take projects, or even just to like give to a student and be like, here's a bunch of ideas, like which of these are the most interesting to you. So
Awesome. I have another question coming from the chat, and it builds upon Chris's in a way, but not only what students could tackle, but what potential roles are there for a citizen science initiative to help feed into this?
yeah, that's a great question, and that is something that if you were at the workshop a few weeks ago, that we were asking folks is, you know, what are yeah, ways that we can involve community science, or kind of like emerging ways to measure these. Yeah, so I think you know, I'm a big proponent of community science, and I think that there's a lot of areas to tackle that, you know, the more folks are involved, the better. So for instance, like there's a lot of potential to use you know, existing platforms like iNaturalist and eBird to answer some of these questions. I think, yeah, just last week, Kyle's Lunch and Learn was on his work to do that. So we kind of already have a basis to apply, to be using those citizen science reports as assessment tools to feed into this framework, and that makes a lot of these measuring a lot of these indicators like way more feasible too. But then there's also potential for, you know, expanding existing community or citizen science projects or continuing to support them. I know Hannah Weber's been working on long-term monitoring or long-term community science efforts for monitoring rockweed and all sorts of other things too. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks. That's what's come into the chat so far. Any other questions from headquarters? Question mark?
Any last thoughts from here or out there? Well, okay then. Hey, Hannah, thank you again. Thank you for all the work you've done from, start to finish on this. And, I hope it's been fruitful for you. I feel like, you and Hannah, the two Hannahs have really built a really valuable process, not only for this, measuring specifically here, but the facilitated process of doing this work and doing one of these kinds of workshops, bringing the right people together, asking good questions, building communication, measuring what people are thinking, and then working on, modeling it for outputs is really, really very valuable to us. So thank you so much.
Well, yeah, that's great to hear. And yeah, and thank you all for listening. And Rebecca, for all your help through all of this too. And yeah, definitely like that. I'm working on this final report right now. I want this to be as helpful for the park and partners as possible. So if you have any thoughts later on, please reach out. I would definitely love to hear any like additional feedback or ideas that folks might have.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, bye, Hannah.